Man, reckon you can teach me how to play them there drums?
Welcome to Diddles Beats. This is a new installment that'll be happening every Monday, and it's where I answer your questions, whether they be on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or yada yada. I'll be answering them every Monday. So let's jump over to YouTube. The first question is from Adam Greenstein, and it is, what cymbals did you use on this gig? And he is referring to the video that I did entitled, This Drum Set Sucks. If you haven't watched it, you can look it up and watch that on my channel. I used on that gig in no particular order 14-inch KZ hi-hats with a K top and a Z bottom. I've had those. They were my second set of hi-hats, so I've had them for like, I don't know, 8 years. I used an 18-inch HHX for a Crash Sabian and then a 22-inch Meinl Sand Ride, Benny Greb Signature Series. Also on YouTube, Harrison Myers asked, Steven, is there any particular type of music that you like to play on the drums? I like to play good music, just plain and simple. It really doesn't matter to me if it's country or rock or funk or Latin or jazz or hip hop or metal or punk rock. It does not matter to me. As long as it's good, I'm digging it. And one more for YouTube, Somebody Matos. Yes, I know this is a generic question, but how can I improve and enlarge my set of fills? You are correct, that is a pretty wide open question, but the biggest way to enlarge your set of fills is to enlarge your set of skills. I would, number one, go through and begin learning my rudiments. Number two, begin applying them on the drum set. That can be as simple as putting your left hand on the snare drum and your right hand on the floor tom and seeing what combinations you can come up with just there. Another way is to take fills that you already play and put them on different voices. So for instance, if you play a fill between the high tom, the floor tom, and the snare drum, maybe we can put that on the hi-hat, the floor tom, and the snare drum. Sometimes the simplest changes can be the best. I have a ton of lessons on enlarging your set of skills on my website. You can go check that out. The link is below this, as well as the video page here on YouTube. You can go scroll through some of those. We'll jump over to Instagram, and if you're following me on there, you know that I'm doing 100 days of the same sticking, right, left, right, right, left. Every day I post one video, 15-second clip of me using that sticking in a different way. So from day 28, I did some implied metric modulation, and that's where you take one-time signature and you play a groove, and then you impose some figures over it, and you make it feel like the time has shifted without really shifting. The Drumming Beat says, this was mind-blowing. Yes. I want to try to do some of this stuff, but I also want to understand it. How exactly do you impose the 4/4 fill and subdivide? Is it just groups of 6 over and over again, and eventually it will land on 1? Short answer to your question, yes, and also no. So when it comes to imposing time, we have to realize that we're dealing with a polyrhythm. A polyrhythm is simply 2 groups of notes that are put on top of each other. So for instance, if I have 2 beats, and also in that same frame of time I have 3 beats, and I put them on top of each other, I now have a 3/2 rhythm, which sounds something like this. Now that's not truly a polyrhythm until we can feel both sides of that equation. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Awkward. Until we can count both sides of that, we don't have a polyrhythm. We just have a really cool rhythm. I took a groove that I would usually play phrased in 16th notes, and I put that same group of notes, so 16 notes long, I put it over sextuplets. If we go back to that polyrhythm and play it, now we need to be able to count both sides. But on the 3 side, I'm not just going to count to 3, now I'm going to impose a 4 figure over that. So instead of being 1 2 3 1 2 3, it's now 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. That takes 2 bars to resolve in regular 4/4 time. And if I take sextuplets and subdivide that, every 4 sextuplets would be a beat in that new time. Now, I also have to realize where my original time is. So if I'm implying this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I also need to be able to count the other side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And all of that gets a little bit confusing. Makes a lot more sense if you can write this out. But yes, knowing where you start and knowing when that will resolve, so knowing what measure, in this case, if we're using sextuplets, it's going to be 2 measures where that will resolve back to 1. Also on Instagram, I got a question, what crash cymbal are you using? This is the #1 question I get. What crash cymbal do I use in the majority of my videos? Meinl, Byzance, vintage, 20-inch crash. Meinl, Byzance, 20-inch vintage crash. Meinl, Byzance, 20-inch vintage crash. Meinl, Byzance, 20-inch vintage crash. And one more from Instagram. This question is from T-Row. He asks, how has this challenge impacted your overall playing and creativity? Do you ever find it to be annoying or a nuisance? So he's talking about the 1 for 100 campaign I'm doing on Instagram. Do I find one sticking for 100 days, trying to find 100 ways to use that annoying or a nuisance? I find it challenging, but that's the whole point of the thing, is to take a very simple sticking and see how much we can come up with. If you look throughout the arts, not just music, you'll find that great artists, and I'm not saying I'm a great artist, I'm just saying I like to imitate great artists and what they do. And you'll find that what they do is they limit their palette. So they may limit their palette to just blue paint. What can I do with just blue paint? Maybe they'll limit their palette to I'm just going to use pencils. Whatever the limitation they impose is, it makes them and forces them to be more creative, to come up with more out of less. And that was the whole point of this. And yes, it is doing that for me. I'm having a blast doing it. Some days it feels more like a nuisance than it is a help, but that's the point. It's supposed to push you further. And still on Instagram, somebody else says, look at the size of that crash cymbal. That's what she said? Yes, my crash cymbal looks huge from my overhead shot. It just has to do with the way the camera's set up. The crash cymbal is actually a 20-inch, and the ride is actually a 22-inch, although the crash cymbal looks about 84 inches from the angle that it's at. And we'll jump over to Facebook for one more question. Silky Johnson asks, what's an easy way to travel with a drum set as a minimalist? And he also asks, where could I play my acoustic drums without silencing them or them being exposed to extreme temperature changes? Both awesome questions. As far as being a minimalist, well, to travel as a minimalist, you have to really be a minimalist in your setup. And so I would just suggest eliminating drums from your current setup. So if you're currently playing 18 toms and 22 cymbals, I would maybe pull that back a little bit. But if you move to a bigger city, you will find that transporting them does become a problem. You'll also find that a lot of clubs simply have house kits because of that. I came up with my minimalist set whenever I was in college. On top of just taking away drums, you also have the option of looking at several drum companies make these type of hip gig kits where you can actually pack them inside of each other. They all fit in the kick drum or the floor tom or whatever. And I would look into that. Where can you play your acoustic drums without silencing them and then being exposed to extreme temperature changes? I dealt with this whenever I first moved to Nashville. I was living in an apartment and I needed a place to practice. So I began looking in the wanted ads and I found a couple of musicians here because who would have thought Nashville has a bunch of musicians. So I hooked up with some other musicians, namely a guitar player named Dwayne Dennison. He played with the Jesus Lizards as well as Tomahawk. It worked out great. Dwayne used it in the afternoons for rehearsals. I used it in the morning. Now what it was it was actually at a storage unit, but it was an internal storage unit. It was an oddly shaped unit in a corner that they had just outfitted to be a practice room. And so I split the payments with about 3 other people, and it worked out in a win-win situation for all of us. It was temperature controlled. You may check in the city where you are. Chances are if they have a big music scene, they will have something like that. A lot of times storage companies will actually not mind if you go talk to them and say, hey, after hours, between the hours of so and so, I would like to put my drums in here, store them, and play them. They have temperature controlled rooms. If they don't have a problem with it, then you're a go. Now, sometimes they do have a problem with it, so it's always best to approach them first before you just go playing your drums. This wraps up the first episode of Diddles Beats, where I answer your questions every Monday. On Wednesday, you'll find a new daily beat goes up. It'll be some rehearsals here. We have a couple of large rehearsal studios, SIR studios being one of them, and we will be there rehearsing for a couple of showcases. Don't forget about the new schedule. I now upload Mondays, Wednesdays, and Sundays. You can jump over to my website if you haven't already and download your free downloadable lesson pack, 30 Days to Better Doubles. The link is below this. In addition, we hang out on Facebook every day. We hang out on Instagram. I'm doing 1 for 100, and so I'll be posting another beat later today. If you want to take your drumming further, jump over to the website, check out the lessons that I do every week. You can find the link below this. And if I don't see you in any of those places, I'll see you in the next video.